Hi guys, and thanks again for joining me on one of my videos. And today it's kind of not such of a random record reference review, which I've been doing a while. Grab a fistload of records, sit there and talk about them and how they've influenced me, or whether it's a so-called guilty pleasure or whatever, because I think everything that I've got, whether it be MP3 or CD or vinyl, all of the music I hear and own, there's a reason why it's in my collection and why I love it. But today is a bit more of a specific kind of less random record review reference, I guess, because you guys know I work a lot in the studio. I do a lot of sessions, whether it be remote sessions for people all over the world, or whether it's something in the local studios I work at, like NARM Studios, Real World Studios, or Earthworm, or Riverside. They're all, within about 45 minutes from where I live. And thankfully I do a lot of work there with loads of different artists and different styles. And I've just, as I say, spent some time. And it's always fascinating to me to come back to talk about this kind of stuff, meaning, things I wanted to touch on are things like, keeping your parts feeling original, even though some of the songs may have similar riffs and similar singer-songwriter jingly jangly guitars, and we end up doing similar patterns, and it's like, how can we break that up? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and a few albums that I've picked specifically for that reason. So the first one I want to start with is an album which goes back to like 1985-86, which is China Crisis, Flaunt the Imperfection. They're an 80s band that people still talk about, but this is the album that I first heard. And the drummer on this album, Kevin Wilkinson, is unfortunately no longer with us, but his playing on this record really solidified some ideas for me of how to play for the song. Now, at the time I was 15, I didn't really get it, but over the years I've kept coming back to it, listening to some of his fill choices and certainly his grooves. Drum sound maybe not so much, because it was of its day, and of course Walter Becker produced this album, and he did obviously a very good job, and it sounds very clean and very kind of Steely Dan-ish, in the way that is so tidy. But that's no bad thing, because they're great songs, well crafted, and it needed some great production on it. So him stepping in to do it was definitely a good thing. But, there's a lot of feels on this song that could be seen as being fairly similar. But Kevin was really clever in his choice of how he used the hi-hat, and he'd play little splashes along with the snare at the same time, and little ruffs on the hat, 4-stroke ruff, and things like that. And his use of the rototoms or octobans or whatever he had, or maybe it may have just been an 8 or 10 inch drum that he tuned up very high, and I think that's on Strength of Character. But ding ding, like big timbale kind of fills, which is kind of Stuart Copeland-esque. But I just remember hearing it and thinking at the time, with what else was going on, his drumming stood out to me then, and it still does now. And if ever I'm working with a band that kind of, and this could go for any of these albums I'm going to talk about, they're kind of referencing a little bit of that, not copying obviously, but borrowing a little bit of that, and I can hear it. Sometimes I'll get on my laptop with my headphones or ask them to play it through the speakers, a song from this album, if I feel that, it's like, what would Kevin do at this point? And I'm probably going to say that a lot about all these drummers. And the first song that I heard from this was the first single, King in a Catholic Style. And I remember it was on a school trip. We were in the bus, coach going to somewhere in Bristol, can't remember. And I just remember it coming on, the riff. And then he comes in with like a snare thing, almost like a train, but not swung kind of thing on the snare. And I just remember thinking, God, that's an interesting groove. I've never kind of heard that before. And then the next single off of that, You Did Cut Me, kind of reminded me a little bit of, I was listening to the Average White Band at that time. There's some sax on there and stuff, and it's not funky like that, but it's very well arranged. Again, very Steely Dan-esque, I guess, but I didn't know about Steely Dan then at 15. But his drumming on that is great, his use of fills, and he uses the China really nicely, which I know a lot of people can't stand China cymbals because of the 80s. But he used it in a really tasteful way. There's a track on it called Blue Sea, which actually was the B-side to You Did Cut Me, if I remember rightly, because I've got that. It was like on a single, but it was like another single with it of live tracks possibly, I can't remember. I've got that around somewhere. And Blue Sea's on that, and the way he uses the China is something that also Michael B did in much later years with Prince on songs like Diamonds and Pearls, where he wouldn't put a bass or a snare under it, but he just use it as a sound, which is kind of unthinkable because most people were just like hitting the snare and the China all this way around at the same time, or with a bass drum. But he, Kevin, and also Michael B would put it in different places just for the sound of it, for the sort of sound it made, which is kind of like Manu did with Splashes, I guess, and Stuart Copeland with Splashes. Don't always put a bass drum under it, let it just speak in its own right. And at 15, that was pretty impressive. So I had to have a China. I didn't get one for a long time, but eventually got one. But Dad bought me a massive Zildjian Pang cymbal, which was totally different, and it was all riveted. It was a great cymbal, and I've still got it. But yeah, it wasn't quite what I asked for. but bless him, that's what I got. But anyway, so yeah, the China, his use of the China. And of course, it's one of those things that, any of these albums I talk about, you might go on Spotify, start playing it and think, oh, it's so dated. But, I always say to my students and stuff, you have to look past that. You can say that about anything. True, some albums, to be fair, sound good they just sat right. Rumours still sounds good. Revolver still sounds good, The Floyd albums still sound good, because I'm talking about classic ones. The Zepp album, some Deep Purple, Average White Band, any of these things we talk about, they still sound good. So some other albums in their canon of work maybe don't stand up as well. But I say look over that when you're listening to stuff like this. Hear what he's doing. Hear how he's phrasing with the vocal sometimes, how he'll set up a fill for the vocal or for something that comes next, which is kind of like a big band drummer. Ian Pace would do that in Deep Purple as well. Sound, as I say, don't worry so much about the sound. It's a thing, it's of its time, but think more about the playing and how he puts his bass drum parts in with what the bass synth or the bass guitar was doing. This is the kind of genius that comes out from these people that I'm talking about. But I don't want to blow it all on this one album. I've got a few more things to talk about. But yeah, brilliant album. I would say check it out. If you don't know it, definitely check it. China Crisis, Flaunt the Imperfection. Brilliant. Just some amazing songs on it. Amazing playing and great production. Okay, so the next one. I don't actually have any vinyl here, which is unthinkable. I surely should have, right? But I don't. And I guess it's still in the lockup from when I moved. But the other band I wanted to talk about, as I say, there's no vinyl here, is a band called Prefab Sprout, which again are from that sort of 80s period. Remember, that's when I grew up. And a lot of the influences then, when I'm going through my teenage years, they stick with you and, they mean a lot, and they stay all through your life. You can't help it. They help the building blocks of your foundations of your music listening. And Paddy McAloon, amazing songwriter in the band and singer. I think they're very much more of an album band more than a live band, which I think is fair to say. But the drummer, Neil Conti, again, same as Kevin Wilkinson in China Crisis, there'd be a lot of feels that could be seen as being the same. And that's we all face that, right? So again, if I'm just yesterday I was recording, and I had a moment where I could easily go into the boom, ta boom, boom, gat, boom, ta boom, boom, gat, or I could go boom, ta boom, boom, ta boom, boom, because it's that strummy kind of thing. You think, which beat do I pick? Oh, I did that on the last one. So again, I asked Jay, who was doing the production, the engineering, so could you just get up Apple Music or Spotify, whatever, and can we just listen to some Prefab Sprout from it, just to get, what would Neil do in this situation? And he would always come up with really tasteful parts. I think the albums, Langley to Memphis, that album is a brilliant record. Jordan the Comeback, Steve McQueen, they're the ones that stand out to me as being the ones that really I reference from a hell of a lot. And with that band, also the snare sound and the drum sound in general, I would sort of take as well, because the drum sound on Jordan, the Comeback on that album, is very different to the Steve McQueen. And obviously the songwriting is reasonably similar, and Jordan was later, so it kind of developed a bit more. But obviously so with production and stuff, so you can hear how we can still have those, very singer-songwritery songs, great pop songs. and I just want to say pop, but great songs, how later on in a few years' time, maybe it's only 5-6 years between them or something, how production values had changed and how his drum sound had changed. And I think Thomas Dolby produced both, and how they were hearing things differently. Anyway, listening to those drummers, and as I say, these other ones, they come up with some genius things, like maybe just drop out the hi-hat. So it's just bass and snare. That could be a thing. Or maybe crotchets on the hi-hat and then break into quavers for the bridge, or the pre-chorus, let's say, or the middle eight. It's not just hi-hat, ride for the chorus or something, back to hi-hat. That was 50s and 60s stuff, which was great, giving us a foundation of where we could play various parts of the kit to bring things up, bring things down. All those things are important. And also, as I say, this boom, that conundrum, which happens a lot. And I'm sure a lot of you out there who are watching this come across that a lot. The other one is kind of boom, ga, boom, ga. Someone to play something that's kind of, I don't know, singer-songwriter Neil Young, band, Lennon-ish, Plastic Ono Band type vibe, and it's easy to fall in the same traps. So sometimes just doing a single bass drum every time and not doing the boom ga, the 3 and on the bass drum, or and 3 boom ga boom boom. Sometimes it's nice if the bass player is doing one of those other options that you play straight, and that's one thing I learned about listening to a lot of funk. When you hear like Parliament and stuff, where it could be quite funky on the bass, or James Brown, it could be quite funky on the bass, but the drums are quite straight. And if all the mixer, the channels were down on the mixer and you came in to hear it and you just heard the drums playing straight, you say, oh, it's a rock track. But until you bring up the bass and then the rhythm guitar, and you think, oh, it's a rock groove, but that's funky. Prince did it a lot. Lenny Kravitz does it a lot. Red Hot Chili Peppers. If Flea's go mad on the bass, Chad's straight. Sometimes Flea is straight and Chad's a bit more funky on the drums. So maybe you want to think about sharing that out with you and your bass player and rhythm guitar. Think about how that works. Not everyone being funky at the same time is going to make it funky. Neil Conti would come up with some really ingenious ideas for bass drum placements in those kind of things. And because they're song based, it's not fusion or instrumental music, that's muso. It's muso in a songwriting way. So I go to those records and Neil's playing and he just gives me a little bit of inspiration. Again, does nice stuff with the hi-hats, again with the china, splash placements occasionally, and really musical drum fills that could be absolutely nothing, meaning not technical, but they just sit in the right place. There's a song called Wild Horses, which is Jordan the Comeback, and he's playing on that. It's a very slow kind of ballad thing, but what he does on the hi-hat and where he puts the bass drum and stuff in little turnarounds in the bar between the vocal, just great. They're little things. And of course, this is all subjective. You might hear some of that and go, ugh. And then you might put another track on by him on another album, by Prefab, and go, oh, that's more like it. I'm getting that. So that's the lovely thing about music. I can give you the idea. You can go and listen and see what you think. But believe you me, they're interesting. And also when I speak to some producers who've worked with Neil Conti, I've got some great stories, but they say that he's such a great drummer. He's so musical and he understands about repetition and trying to be different. Not just to be different, but be creative with each song. Don't just go for stock footage rhythm. Think about hi-hat, think about snare, think about your bass. Those 3 main things can really change up a song massively, and there's a lot you can do with just those 3 parts of the kit. Okay, another drummer I want to talk about is the drummer with The War on Drugs, and that's Charlie Hall. This is more of a newer band. Obviously, War on Drugs have been around for a while. I mean, not new, but they were kind of new to me. I heard tracks from this album when I was on tour, and like most things in music, sometimes it touches you, sometimes it doesn't, and it landed for me, and I really liked it. And the first side, Up All Night, Pain and Holding On. I mean, I like all the album, but that's the side I always go back to. And again, Charlie Hall, same deal as these other guys, but this album, I really like the drum sounds as well. They've really thought about the production of the drums, and the drum sound can change for different songs. Sometimes there's electronic drums involved as well, like a drum machine, which is cool as well, because people who know me know that I love that kind of thing. That thing of thinking about changing your snare sound for different songs. Some people don't, and that's fine. If it works for the whole album, brilliant. But even yesterday when I was tracking some songs, there was one song I heard this kind of high life kind of groove. It was kind of Manu Katché, Paul Simon kind of Peter Gabriel world music kind of touch. But this one I wanted to tune up, so I tuned the snare up and the toms, and we got a totally different sound. And I think that's really important. It takes a bit more time, and if you've only got a day in the studio to get 10 tracks, you probably haven't got time to do that. But when you have got the time, it's always good just to sit back and think, right, that snare's not sitting well with the vocal or with the guitar. Let's just find a space for it, so it sits. As I say, if you haven't got the time, you haven't got the time. But it's worth getting your head into and being aware of it, having it in your noggin to start with, and say, I could change the snare sound on this, or the hats, or the bass drum could be different. We could have a different kind of sound, a more 70s sound, or a more 80s sound, more click on the back, on the playing head, whatever. Recording techniques in studios. On the bass drum, sometimes I'll have 4 or 5 microphones on a bass drum, not just the one, or 2, one inside, one outside. There could be one just a few feet away. It could be one just over the bass drum, like what they call a crotch mic or a crunch mic that's under the ride cymbal, just above the bass drum rim, something like that. And there's so much you can do. And of course, when you're making a record like these guys and all these people, there's more time to make it and so on. But as I say, it's good to get it in there. Even if you just put a big fat O-ring, on the head, of the snare, just to change it up, that could be enough. But I actually found Charlie Hall through Ludwig videos. I saw him playing a Ludwig club date before I knew he was in this band, and I just really liked his playing, and it was really what I call earthy and real. It wasn't all fancy and stuff. He was just a really good song drummer, and I guess that's what we're talking about here, song drummers. And even if you're a muso drummer, give a bit of time to the song, the 3-minute song. It won't do you any harm. Next one is a band that's very close to my heart, Devo. I love them. This is Freedom of Choice. And I've actually been to their studio in LA, which was amazing, and met most of the band members. Now, unfortunately, Alan from this band, Alan Myers, is no longer with us. But what a drummer. Amazing, amazing player. And what I like about Devo, what they bring to the table is, you should check them out anyway. Brilliant band, very funny. They're right on it, and they were right about so many things, devolution and blah, blah, blah. But you can get into that, check that out online. But yeah, great record. What do I like about this? It's electronics plus live drums, which, is a plus for me. But it's the way he plays like a machine. It's a bit like the krautrock drummers in Can and Neu. The hi-hat's steady all the way through. It's not like a feel thing where you go, you got that thing where you shaft with the stick on 1, 2, and 3, 4. It's just straight all the way through, because that's how it has to sound. And I think Mark was talking about, Mothersbaugh was talking about how he would say, you're playing too much like a drummer, play like a machine. So he'd have to sort of attack the kit with that constant on the hi-hat, as if somebody was doing that on a drum machine. And produce that live, and he did it, and it's so exciting to hear all those records. The first 3 or 4 albums, I just think, are brilliant, and his drumming is kind of punk, post-punk, but it's just got this attitude that I just love. And New Wave, I love New Wave anyway, but yeah, not many drummers play it like him. Like Clem Burke was doing something different, and all the other bands, Stuart Copeland, we talk about all these things. They were all doing great stuff. But no one's playing drums quite like him in that world, where he was sort of mimicking a drum machine, and everything's really consistent, and his fills are quite mechanical, but they really fit the music. And I think it still sounds fresh today, because people are still referencing it. But yeah, his drumming, again, for all those songs, as I say, gives me that idea that I need to click into Alan mode if I need that hi-hat to do that thing, and a certain snare sound, and a certain vibe, just ploughing through this, boom, gadget, drum, drum, gat, ploughing through, whether it be a Moog bass line or a live bass line, just, instantly, not fancy fills, no grace notes, no rolls into a fill, just nice and straight, almost like it's a drum machine. This album and albums around this, just around this time, just great. They're just fantastic. I would suggest, to check them out. Okay, so thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back next week with something else. I don't know what, but people are sort of liking these, and that was, I say, a different, more intense one, focusing on one thing rather than just randomly going through stuff. But I think that fits in nicely with the other reference reviews anyway. So as usual, if you could like and subscribe, I'd be very grateful, and pass this on to other drummers and musicians that you know. And as normal, take care. As I say, thanks for tuning in. Keep safe, keep enjoying music, keep enjoying drumming, and I shall see you soon.